Welcome to History Twists. You know, this is a wonderful and freeing exposition in many ways because we take things that give you a foundation of things that really did happen, then change something and go from there. And as I have mentioned before, Dr. Deneen and I, we have a little different style sort of things, and that's cool. And what we decided was not to compromise. Instead, you, our listeners, get the benefits of having two different kind of styles in presenting this. And to me, that's fun and exciting. So this one here is um, a product of Dr. Deneen's brilliance and his mind. So, hey, as I say, welcome to History Twists. So, for nearly 3/4 of a century, the world had to fear and respond to a superpower, the Soviet Union. Its attempts to dominate the world and the right wing dictatorships that arose to counteract its communist ideology spilled rivers of blood. A world without Marxism in Russia would probably have avoided the German attempt at world domination through Nazism to fight it.
3/4 of a century long period of the Cold War led to a lot of injustice and violence in the name of communism and in the name of the right-wing groups that broke all democratic rules to stop it. But specifically speaking of Russia, after the collapse of the 300-year-old Romanov monarchy in April 1917, a democratic government under Alexander Kerensky and Georgy Prydskorgelyov was formed. That lasted until the October Revolution, in which communist forces, led by Lenin and Trotsky, overthrew that government and set up the world's first communist nation. But the anti-communist forces, which represented multiple political viewpoints of all stripes, did not go down without a fight. The Civil War broke out in November of 1917 throughout the former Russian Empire. It lasted for 4 years. In this episode of History Twists, we'll discuss what I believe could have happened if the communist leaders had not been successful. Anti-communist leaders were called whites. This was not a racial idea. This is the white color of their banner, and they were far from politically unified. These range from right-wing leaders loyal to the deposed monarchy, democratic anti-communist socialists, anarchists, members of minority groups, and religious armies led by both the Jewish and Russian Orthodox communities. The variety and the goals of each group was very different, and that initially made military victory more difficult. But I think the long-term prospects for social satisfaction, autonomy, and peace were more possible because of the concept, at least in principle, of pluralism. Society works best with the most autonomy given both to individual people and differing groups.
You know, one of the things that kind of strikes me, and if I'm getting too far off track here, Dr. Deneen, pull my chain, and that's fine. But communism, on paper, man, it's a kick butt good theory. It seems to be like it would work, and I suspect that that's why there was some momentum to the movement. Now, the reality is also, in my opinion, it never had a chance to work. Never had a chance because of human nature. And, you know, before I continue on with this, I just wanted to get your take on that.
I think you're right. I mean, human beings want to see a benefit from their work. And communism says sacrifice for the good of society for the good of the revolution, the proletariat, this wonderful utopian system we're going to create just as soon as all the capitalists and all the religious people and all the bourgeoisie are gone. And people don't like to feel that they work under very difficult conditions for a benefit that'll be given to their great grandchildren 100 years later.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. But yeah, I mean, it just one of these times we need to really do a podcast, really kind of focusing on forms and structures of government, because, as you say, the notion of one of the guiding principles, uh, for each according to their needs, from each according to their abilities. Wow, that's a great idea. But anyhow, we can get to that some other time, I hope. So, anyhow, just how were the forces of the Red Army defeated? Well, that's pretty complicated. In our present timeline, three factors led to the whites' failure. First, difficulty obtaining supplies. Another, a refusal to work with Polish and Finnish anti-communists, which just, that perplexes me quite a bit. And a short-sighted national policy. Only the Cossacks seemed loyal to the white cause. The Cossacks, for goodness sakes. In sort of modern day time. Anyhow, Brent Mussenberg's The Cossack Struggle Against Communism details other possibilities. You might want to check it out. As Mussenberg said, soon the Bolsheviks seized power in Petrograd on the 7th or 8th of November 1917. Most Cossack atamans and their government refused to recognize the legitimacy of the new regime. The Don Cossack ataman, Alexei Kaledin, went as far as to invite opponents of the Bolsheviks to the Don host. However, the position of many Cossack governments was far from secure, even within the boundaries of their hosts. In some areas, Soviets formed by outlanders and soldiers rivaled the Cossack government, and ethnic minorities also tried to acquire a measure of self-rule. Even the Cossack communities themselves were divided, as the atamans tended to represent the interests of prosperous landowners and the officer corps.
As with so many things, there are factions within factions. This is as much a civil war as anything else. But the anti-communist Cossack leaders elect new atamans and they make common cause with other forces, most notably the volunteer army in South Russia. That's the largest and longest lasting white force. Subsequently, their homelands became bases for the white movement during the Russian Civil War. Throughout the war, Cossacks sometimes fought as an independent ally for their own nation state and as auxiliary to the white armies. As I said, in South Russia, the armed forces of South Russia under General Anton Denkin, the greatest white leader there is, relied heavily on conscripts from the Kubek and Don Cossack hosts to fill the ranks. Through the Cossacks, the white armies acquired experienced, skilled horsemen that the Red Army was unable to match until 1921. But the relationship with these Cossack governments and the white leaders was frequently acrimonious. Some units were ill-disciplined, prone to bouts of looting and violence that caused the peasantry to resent the white governments. Kuban and Terek squads carried out pogroms against Jews, despite the orders from General Denkin condemning such activity. They give a bad reputation to the white government as being old school anti-Semitic reactionaries.
Okay, and you're talking about in Ukraine with these people, right?
The Kubak, sorry,
go ahead.
The Kubak politicians wanting an independent state of their own sometimes fight against the armed forces of South Russia in the Russian Far East. Azuri Cossacks in Transbaikal undermined the rest of Siberia's White Army by disrupting traffic on the Trans-Siberian Railway and engaging in acts of banditry. I believe if the Japanese had gotten involved sooner, that could have kept the white movement going in the eastern part of Siberia for at least another year. Of all the Western powers supporting the whites, the British and the Japanese were the most involved.
Hmm. So the Japanese got involved in this? How did that happen?
They did. They wanted to split Manchuria with a white government as do what they did 10 years later and take it over, at least partially. But the Japanese were involved for that purpose, and the British were afraid of communist uprisings in their Asian colonies. So many Western nations, including the United States, got involved, but the British and the Japanese did the most of it.
Okay, because I think that's something probably a lot of people don't really know. Okay, so in our scenario, or your scenario, as it were, white commanders Anton Denikin, Pyotr Ringal, and Nestor Mishenko, head of the Ukrainian Black Army, entered into a marriage of convenience, so to speak. These historic rivals could have outfought Trotsky. I wonder why that didn't happen. Let's look at three tipping points here. Anton Denkin, the best anti-communist commander of the South Russian army, came close to conquering Moscow, which then was the Soviet capital in 1919. The struggle failed because there was too much division in goals and methodology within the ranks. In our story, Denkin makes the conquering of Moscow the end of the battle plan, not the beginning, thus avoiding a disastrous split with Cossack commander Peter Transov, who wanted to build up support among the northern army of the General Nestimino. General Rangnal is persuaded to compromise with his idea of a united Russia to secure Polish troops who will only fight the communists to free their motherland. Grumbling, Rangnal referred to Polish independence as giving a boy the key to the liquor cabinet, but is won over by Denikin, who pled with him for hours. The Estonian and Polish forces thus rallied to the white cause, securing the western border. Future Polish Marshal Joseph Pilsudski and Finnish leader Gustav Mannerheim held off the Soviet forces. Comrade Sergei Kamnev attempted to rally the so-called people's detachments and untrained civilians, but failed before Denikin, the Cossacks, and the Poles. Check Things You Don't Know for more about Mannerheim and his dealings with the devil, so to speak. Baron Sternberg was an effective subordinate, but a disastrous leader. His passion for yatar and Japanese culture made him an effective administrative genius, but a poor commander. His mind fell into the garden path of conspiracies and fears, discrediting the anti Soviet cause as it associated it with anti Semitism and the injustices of the old regime. In this story, he is taken out of the field and into the diplomatic corps. When we say in this story, we're talking about our altered timeline, correct, Dr.
Yes.
Nadine? Okay. Um, okay. The Baron needed a field in which he could use his talents without alienating Russia's desperately needed friends. He was able to recruit allies in China, Japan, and Mongolia, which overwhelmed the Soviets, partially in our time and completely in this scenario.
tipping point occurred in the early part of the war. It was an end to the internecine fighting between the various anti-communist forces. There were at least five distinct factions: monarchists desiring a regency in the name of the last surviving Romanov, Grand Duke Cyril; Republicans loyal to the provisional government led by Prince Lvov and Alexander Kerensky; General Korlov, who desired a benign military junta to maintain order till the end of the war; newly restored Patriarch of the Orthodox Church, Tikhon, who fought a Quazoic battle for Christian socialism based on the theories of Tolstoy; and a myriad of separatists seeing a future where Mother Russia is an innumerable collection of villages in which everyone is free to live in their own separate sections in isolation. If they are to survive, the white forces must, and do in this scenario, bury their differences and unite, at least until the issue of immediate survival has been settled. In this scenario, Mencken and Wrangel would have had the benefit of Korleov, a man who respected both of them, as his split with the provincial government did not happen. Now, attention must be paid in turn to the sort of government which would be set up. As I say, there are three main possibilities: a military junta for the duration of the war, such as the body that was created in Hungary after the Belkun regime, the uprising in 1919. Many of the right-wing leaders felt that the liberal-minded members of the Russian government had made too many concessions to extremists on the left. Kerensky had released the communist leaders from prison out of a fear of a right-wing takeover. Had Lenin and Trotsky been kept quietly in jail, the world would have certainly had other troubles, but millions would have been spared the agony of mass destruction. Some desired a republic based on the Constitution and the so-called Constituent Assembly, which did not meet in our time. This would have been the freest governmental structure, could have been a bulwark of both political freedom and free enterprise. The final option would have been a regency in the name of the Romanov dynasty. The Grand Duke Cyril Arkadyevich was a progressive leader who would have guarded the progress made in the decade before the First World War.
It is naive to assume that the world would have become an immediate utopia. The great imbalance of wealth, the struggle for racial equality, the limitations which kept women out of public life, and assorted issues of that nature would have led to further struggles of war and peace. It would be an interesting exercise to figure out how Russia would have developed industrially and politically without Stalinist methods. I think there would have been much better agricultural harvests. This would eliminate the famine in the Ukraine, perhaps, and however, there would still be a great disparity of wealth unless a Stolopin type, former reformer from above, made it their business to create modern infrastructure and encourage voluntary migration to the cities. Ford style, high wage, lower cost style production could lead to many areas of improvement. Perhaps model cities could also have been created. I wonder if non communist leaders would have wanted to follow the universal use of the Cyrillic alphabet to demand that everyone speaks Russian, or whether other languages would be encouraged to accommodate a multicultural nation. Labor unions will also play a role in creating a middle class.
I think there would probably be some degree of ethnic conflict as well, as Muslims, the people in the Asian territories of Russia would find it extremely difficult or might not want to fully assimilate. Poles might feel pressure as they were either Jews, Catholics, or members of local Polish national churches unconnected with either Rome or Constantinople.
I think you're forgetting some very important factors here. The communists promoted social mobility. With a return to the old aristocratic system, there would be a retrogression to 19th century methods in an industrial technological 20th century. No development will take place because the elite won't want it to. The country would have all the troubles that it had under the czars without any of the covering that they had. The worst of both worlds seems to be the fate of the country you are extolling.
You make some valid points. However, as early as 1905, the government started subsidizing education for factory workers. Any government wants an educated workforce, if only in the interest of maximizing its own GDP. I think three industrial leaders of a new Russia would, in general, prove to be in the Ford Cadbury mold of philanthropic capitalism.
Okay. So, okay, there would be another round of pogroms. The safety of the Jewish people and other minorities would collapse. The country would become fascist or a theocracy, perhaps.
Well, the only leader that's openly anti-Semitic and prospective dictator is von Sternberg, as I mentioned him before. That's why I took him out of the battlefront and out of politics in my story. He also believed himself to be an incarnation of a Buddhist god, so not the most stable individual. Only about 20% of the assaults on Jews came from the volunteer white army. And don't misunderstand me, there were anti-Jewish feelings. Even one act of discrimination, much less murder, is too much. But what the communists do is undertake less frequent and more deadly attacks, seeing Jewish people as the embodiment of capitalist exploitation. Those are about 10%. The vast majority of the anti-Semitic acts come from groups not affected with either side, Ukrainian and Belarusian separatists. As far as theocracy goes, the patriarch, Philon, the head of the Orthodox Church, declared his firm opposition to, quote, any government which does not obtain the consent of the people and puts excessive responsibility for non-religious, meaning political affairs, on spiritual leaders.
No, General Wrangel expressed his desire to have one culture. Isn't forced assimilation both immoral and counterproductive? If a person can't be free in language, diet, music, or dress, what are they fighting for? They don't have a stake in the situation. They're being forced to ascribe to something that isn't theirs. So why would they want to do anything?
Well, I think to a certain point you are correct. I don't say every liberty Westerners take for granted would be fully observed. There would be mistakes, abridgments, false asceticism, particularly in the beginning. But I do believe it's a matter of comparison. It would be much better compared to the other viable possibility of a communist regime and 75 years of dealing with that. It wouldn't be perfect, but I think it would be better.
So that's a very large assumption, and that is based on what? In other words, you had a tipping point here. You said that something changed, and you're talking about um, a new timeline versus the present timeline. And I don't know if it's very clear. Could you say something about that? I mean, why would this have happened? What is that tipping point? What is the central core of this?
The tipping point at its best takes place in early 1919. Remember, I said that Dankin almost conquered Moscow. Well, the problem with the white leadership in general, no matter what political views they had, was disunity. Everybody wanted to have their own way, thought they had a monopoly on the truth, knew everything. So what happens in 1919 if you want to list one important tipping point, is the leaders realize we have to compromise. It is dangerous to be fighting over details when our very movement is in jeopardy. Let's agree to disagree for now. Let's unite behind a military force that's the strongest, and let's drop this greater Russia idea, because Estonians and Poles and Finns that had been part of the Russian Empire did not want to go back to that, and they fought brilliantly. And in our timeline, the Soviets leave them alone, and the whites pressure them. So that's where the reverse is. That they realize, as fellow Democrats, they need to work with an anti-communist force, and that's where the better outcome comes, in my point. And since it did not happen in reality, we can only guess. But this is the guess that I have based on research and just using my own mind. Because, as you pointed out before, the very fact that this is a twist means we can't be too focused on what did happen. We need to look at a possibility, as long as it's a logical possibility.
Okay, so what you're saying, your case is that um, although the the Russians in general had a problem with the czarist form of government, that the uh, the notion of um, of a more egalitarian system in communism, which communism proposed, was the deciding factor in our present timeline. But in the this new timeline, those factors were overcome by other factors. Is that essentially correct?
Basic, yes.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, I have said, and I think you would agree with me, that, you know, the value of history twists goes back to something else. And I know I'm taking a little side trip here, but sometimes the typical way history is taught can seem boring or irrelevant because names, dates, events, they're presented with no context in a vacuum. And students, live in a today, they live in a world which moves very fast. So perspective is sometimes lost. And that also uh, makes any kind of creativity, which I think you really need if you're looking at a history in a realistic way, um, to understand the intricacies and the interplay of sometimes lesser known facts and ideas that have a real effect on outcomes. And even just a small change can make a huge difference. And I want to just take an aside here, another aside. Folks, if you're listening to this, and I hope you are, and I hope you're enjoying it, the one of the biggest points I would like to see made through history twists is, if you don't like it, what's happening now, and you think, oh, my vote or whatever won't count, it won't make any difference, then you are being stupid. You need to actually do something. You need to actually do something, because, as we've seen innumerable times, small events, small events can, affect huge amounts of time and future history. It kind of goes hand in glove with our whole notion about boots on the ground history. Wouldn't you agree, Dr. Deneen?
I do. And there's also another factor as to why students sometimes find history hard to understand. Some historians, just like artists, physicians, scientists, they tend to speak in code. They have their magical words to hide the meaning of what they're saying. It's important to make concepts understandable to people who, unlike me, didn't spend hours poring over the dusty tomes. I have to say, my experience as both an adjunct through these podcasts has helped me to really understand it's very important not to hide the meaning of events in embroidered phraseology, what I like to call $20 words. That there are multiple points of view that need to be analyzed and explored, and it ought to be done in a way that ordinary people can understand it. And if I may say so, Dr. Weaver, I'm very grateful for you, your encouragement and your guidance when I'll come up with something that seems very otherworldly. You'll sometimes say, what does that have to do with the price of rice? Meaning, how is it relevant to the larger issue we're talking about here? And you help me keep my feet on the ground, pun intended, as I look at this stuff. And I'm very grateful for that. I really hope, ladies and gentlemen, you've enjoyed this. There are more coming, and it's been a challenge, but it's been worth every minute of it. I have enjoyed this particular aspect very much.
Well, yeah, and just what this podcast is about as much as anything else is a balance of things. You have your background, I have mine. And do we ever disagree? Absolutely. And that's cool.
I think that's what makes it interesting.
Well, I think it is too. And I also think it is what makes the final outcome more valuable. Because if you get just one perspective, and I don't care from whom that one perspective comes, if that is all you hear, then your perception of things is going to be skewed.
Absolutely.
I think people see things through their own lens, and that's valid and that's critical. But if your lens is based on one other, uh, you know, factor, then I would say it maybe isn't so valid. You need to hear things. If you listen to one type of news broadcast and that's all you listen to, well, newsflash, they have their perspective too. They have their lens. So listen to other things. That's why I often engage with people who are far more conservative politically than I am, like by a light year. And I struggle to actually find the meaning and understand what they're saying. And I think that makes my lens a little bit broader and a little bit more comprehensive. And I think that's important. Not saying I've got it all right, because I don't.
I think you're absolutely right.
So, anyhow, look, I hope that y'all have enjoyed this and that you'll come back. We've got some other things coming up on History Twist that we have a couple coming up that are, in a different style, shall we say. And hopefully you'll enjoy that. And I mean, I'm particularly excited about a couple of them because guess what? Some of those are from my perspective. Some of those are my style. And you may hate it, you may like it, whatever. But hopefully you'll learn something from it and you'll get some enjoyment. So anyhow, look, give us a like and more importantly, comments and come back and join us, okay?
Absolutely, folks.
So for now, bye.
Bye bye.